So now I'm going to offer you a tool. It's actually an entire program by which you can insert particular habits and activities at particular phases of the day, not times of day, but phases of the day. Because it turns out that particular phases of the day are associated with particular biological underpinnings, chemicals and neural circuits and so forth. And in doing so, it will make it far more likely that you'll be able to regularly engage in these habits and activities over a long period of time. Now, whether or not that will move you from somebody who ordinarily would take 200 days to form a habit to one of those 18 days to habit people in that earlier study I mentioned, I don't know, but I am certain that it will have a significant shift on allowing you to engage in particular habits more easily and to consolidate those habits more quickly. It involves dividing the 24-hour days into what I call 3 phases. The first is phase 1, which is 0 to 8 hours after waking up. The second phase is the 9 to 14, maybe 15 hours after you wake up. And the third phase is 16 to 24 hours after waking up. So today I'm going to use the to bed at 10 p.m. and the wake up time of 7 a.m. Phase 1, which again is 0 to 8 hours after waking, has a particular neurochemical signature. Regardless of what you do, the neuromodulators norepinephrine, as well as epinephrine, so that's noradrenaline and adrenaline, as well as the neuromodulator dopamine, tend to be elevated during that first 0 to 8 hours after waking. There are a number of reasons for this related to the fact that also cortisol is higher in our brain and bloodstream. It's a healthy level of cortisol upon waking. Body temperature is increased, etc. We've heard that the morning is kind of sacred, conquer the hardest things first thing in the morning, and that's been discussed in the pop psychology literature and in the habit formation literature, merely from the perspective of get it out of the way so you can feel good about having done it. But what I'm referring to is quite different. What I'm referring to is a particular phase of day that after rising, after waking up that is, for 0 to 8 hours, right, in that first phase, your whole system is action and focus oriented. Take the habits for which you know there's the highest degree of limbic friction. They are the hardest for you to engage in. They require the most activation energy, and put those in this 0 to 8 hours after waking. This will greatly facilitate your performance of those new habits. By doing them in this particular phase of the day, not necessarily at the same time, but by placing them in this broader window of 0 to 8 hours after waking, what you're doing is you're creating task bracketing. You're making it such that your nervous system will predict when you are going to lean in against limbic friction in order to perform particular types of habits. Phase 2, as I mentioned, is about, again, these aren't specifics, but about 9 to 14 or 15 hours after waking. During this phase of the day, because of the circadian shifts in our biology, the amount of dopamine and norepinephrine that's circulating in our brain and bloodstream tends to start to come down, and levels of cortisol tend to start to come down. A different neuromodulator, serotonin, is starting to rise. Serotonin is definitely going to be highest in this second half of the day and tends to lend itself to a more relaxed state of being. Now, of course, I do realize that some people are less of morning people and find that they really come alive and awake in the afternoon, but most people don't fall into that category. There are certain things that we all can and should do during this phase 2 of each day. What are those things? First of all, as the day goes on, you should try, if you can, to start tapering the amount of light that you're viewing. Simply that you want to start tapering off the amount of really bright light that you're getting, unless it's sunlight. So how do you leverage phase 2 of the day for habit formation? Well, given what we know about the neurochemistry of learning and memory, given what we know about task formation and its reliance on certain forms of neuroplasticity, this second half of the day is a terrific time to take on habits and things that you're already doing that require very little override of limbic friction. So these might be things that you could categorize in common terms as kind of mellower activities. It might be journaling. It might be that you already are performing music, or I should say practicing music regularly, but that there's a particular type of music that is hard for you, or that you're working on a particular piece of music, or you're trying to learn a language, something that's a little bit challenging, but doesn't require a ton of energy in order to override that limbic friction. Your ability to override resistance is really diminished in this second phase of the day. Some of you might say, well, wait, I like to exercise in the second half of the day. That's actually when I have the most energy. That's when I feel warmer. I'm not a morning exerciser. That's absolutely fine. What I'm referring to is the acquisition of new behaviors and placing those consistently at the second half of the day in order to engage this task bracketing mechanism. Phase 3 of the 24-hour schedule runs from about 16 to 24 hours after waking. During that period of time, there are a few things that are going to support being in a state of mind, state of body, that are going to allow neuroplasticity to occur, that are going to allow the rewiring that you've triggered during the waking part of the day to actually take place. Those things are very low to no light, meaning keeping your environment very dark or very, very dim. The body has to drop by about 1 to 3 degrees in order to get into sleep and to stay asleep. So low light, low temperature environment. You can always pile on blankets, of course, if you don't want to be cold at night. You want to be warm enough, but you want your environment to be cold. Phase 3 is really about making sure that whatever limbic friction you've been able to override in phase 1 and trigger some new habit, right? Forcing yourself to write or forcing yourself to study or forcing yourself to exercise during that high limbic friction state. And then whatever things you've been doing in phase 2, which are habits that hopefully have moved a little bit further along the continuum of newly formed versus all the way to reflexive, or things that take less limbic friction in order to do. Phase 3 is when all of that gets really locked into the nervous system through those Hebbian mechanisms like NMDA receptors, et cetera, that I talked about before. Again, neuroplasticity is the basis of habit formation, and neuroplasticity and the rewiring of neural circuits happens in these states of deep sleep. So if you're not obeying this phase 3, if you're not giving phase 3 the materials it needs, and you're not avoiding the certain things like caffeine and bright light and stress during phase 3, you're simply not going to be able to build those habits. So when you do things at particular phases of the day, under particular conditions of neurochemistry, what you're doing is you're giving the brain a very predictable set of sequences that during sleep, it can start to put into your hard drive, if you will. It can really program it into your nervous system so that within a short period of time, hopefully within 18 or maybe even 6 days, or who knows, maybe even fewer days, you'll find that executing those behaviors is very, very straightforward for you, and that you won't have to feel so much limbic friction or override so much limbic friction.